Okay, so before we go back to work on Lab 4, I wanted to point out on Laulima a couple of things. Okay, so one is in the assessments folder, there now is the solutions for quiz 3, and in about 10 or 11 minutes, the solution for assessment 4 will be up there as well. Okay, so make sure you go back and review those so that you know the correct answers to those questions. The other thing, of course, is we have our exam coming up next time. So the answers to the study guide, the sample question, that is posted. Okay, so our exam is next time, handwritten, not on the computer. Several short essay questions, okay, on those topics, and there will be a problem spread out over several questions where you have to basically design a database, coming up with the SQL scripts. Okay, and so here was the sample problem. You have people that are buying computers, and then you have information about the computers. This is clearly from some sort of view. It's not normalized data because it's coming from two different entities, right? The people who buy the computer and the computer information itself. Okay, so the solution is posted right after that. So let's take a look at this. All right, so you have a customers table. You could have called it buyers or users or people, whatever. That I don't even really care on the exam, as long as it's identifying that you have a group of people that are going to buy something. And then the computers table, you're going to need that. And then something to join those two tables together. The way that you know that there's going to be a third table is that if you look, this is a many-to-many relationship between the customers and the computers, because Jane Doe buys a couple of computers, John Doe buys a couple of computers, Bill Gates buys 3 computers. Yeah, so there's each customer can buy more than one computer, and it's certainly possible that there's more than one customer that buys the same computer. Okay, so it's a many-to-many relationship, which means you need to have some sort of bridge table, which I called mine sales. Okay? But you could have called it anything as long as it has a proper relationships, right? So customers, if you look, that one is fairly easy to do because the customer information has first name and last name. Okay? So you have basically an ID field. Serial to start off. It's a fairly safe bet, right? All the tables that you're going to design for this next exam on Wednesday, all of the tables should have an ID field that's serial. Okay, that's just something that will serve as your primary key field. Okay, then computers, there's more fields, but you can basically read those things right off of the table there, right? There's a manufacturer, there's a computer type, there's a CPU, a field, RAM, and then there's price. Okay, about the only thing that you would need to remember about price is that that's not text, that's numeric. And then if you remember that numeric has 2 arguments, the second one is the numbers after the decimal place. And so for a price, it would make sense for that to be 2. Okay, then that's all that basically you need there. Okay, and then sales, very, very important table. But by now, hopefully these kind of tables make sense to you, because here is where you're going to establish your foreign key constraints. And the basic idea is there's no point in storing a customer ID in the sales if that customer ID doesn't exist in the customer's table, right? How can a customer that's not in the table buy one of the computers? Okay, that wouldn't be allowed. Same thing with computer. Okay, so it's fairly straightforward, hopefully by now. Go over the syntax so that you get that correct on the exam. Okay, and then that basically, the join table or the bridge table, the one that contains the foreign key constraints, okay, that's what you use to help you to build up the view. Okay, and that's why that one is so important. Okay, then I made basically some things where I'm adding initial data into there. I noticed that from that first table, the unnormalized data, I have 3 customers, so I put it in here. Notice that I don't put an ID. I could have put the ID field and given them ID values. You don't have to. Okay, if you wanted to be real careful, you could, just to make it a little bit easier on yourself when you put in the sales data. Okay, but I didn't in this case. What this means is that because the ID field is a serial field in the customers table, Jane Doe will be assigned an ID of 1, John Doe will be assigned an ID of 2, and Bill Gates will be assigned an ID of 3. Okay, it's just based on the order that you add them into the table. The computers just added those things in the order that they showed up inside of that table. Okay, so no special order, except I kept it in that order. So it's easier to keep track of things. Once again, if you wanted to be a little more careful, you could actually set the ID field and then give them all values. Then it would be very straightforward to figure out what the ID values are going to be. As it is, this is going to be 1, this is going to be 2, this is going to be 3, this is 4, 5, and so on. Okay? So you have a choice there. Okay, so when I insert into the sales, I need to be consistent with the order that I put in the insert statements for the customers and then the computers. Okay, so here's Jane Doe. I can tell because that customer ID is 1. Okay, here's John Doe, customer ID 2. Bill Gates, customer ID 3. Okay, and then because I inserted in the computers in the same order that it showed up in the unnormalized table or view, then it was pretty easy. This is just going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 because I put it in the same order. Okay, so if you didn't want to put this in the same order as in the table, then it's probably a good idea that you assign the ID value when you do the insert into the tables, something like what we did in several labs, right? So lab 2 and lab 3 in particular. Okay, and then finally, the last thing is to put in the sales view. Okay, so you just put in the field names, okay, that you want to have show up. Notice that I didn't even put in the table name before the field name. That's because all of those field names are unique. In other words, first name, last name only shows up in one of the tables. Manufacturer, type, CPU, RAM, price, those only show up in the computers table. So in that case, you don't have to put in the table name. You could just put in the field name. But if you want to be more careful, you should put in the table name, then a dot, and then the field name. And then from, okay, so when we choose from customers, join sales. The easy way to remember that is the sales table is the bridge table. Okay, that's the one that basically sets the foreign key constraints. And when you have your on, and you set the equality that shows what needs to be matched in order for that data to be pulled up. Okay? Pretty straightforward because the sales table has a customer ID field and it references the ID field in the customers table, right? So if you go back and you look at that, right? Sales table has a customer ID field. It's supposed to match from the customers table the ID field. Same thing, the sales table, the computer ID field has to match the computers table, the ID field. So when you look at the rest of the view, right, then it joins with computers, on the sales table, the computer ID matching from the computer's table, the ID. Okay, the same thing that's used, okay, when we define the sales table to set up the foreign key constraints. Okay, so any questions on that? Okay, now on the exam, okay, even though this thing ends right here, right, because basically that's all was asked for on the exam, there will probably be, in fact, there will be other questions. So, for example, write down the query that would be used to basically get all the customers or show all the customers. So, select star from customers, right, that kind of stuff. So, expect those kind of things to show up as well. Okay, any questions on the answers to the study guide example? Okay, any questions on the exam itself? Okay, well, if you think of any, ask before the day is out or send me email, and I'll be happy to address your question. Okay, so in the assessments, the answers for assessment 4 should be showing up in a couple minutes. So you can take a look at that when you have a chance. Okay, I'm going to go to the daily work folder and then open up the folder with today's date and just click on the HTML file that's located in there. Okay, so first task reminder, we have our exam 1 next time. You will have the full class period to work on it. If you are prepared properly for the exam, you probably will not need the full time, but you can take the full time. Okay, so you don't have to rush through it. Read the questions carefully, think before you write down the answer, and then double check your work before you turn it in, right? Because you have more than enough time. Okay, so don't try to rush through it and just turn it in and then not double check your work. Make sure you double check your work because you should have more than enough time in order to do it. Okay, so let's return to lab 4. I'm going to just click on that to remind you. Okay, so in that lab, we got some data, and the raw data is definitely not normalized. And what we want to do is write a Python program that's going to take this raw data and then make it so that we have the SQL commands basically to add initial data into the table, into the tables, I should say, so that this thing is represented correctly. All right, so if you look, we had these files last time, okay, so we're going to get back to that. In case you don't have good copies of those files, if you click on those links, you go save link as, you can download that to your lab 4 folder, and you can start off at the same place that I'm going to be starting off in just a little bit. Okay, so let me open up Windows Explorer. I'm going to go to my Documents folder, Docker folder, the main Docker folder, the Docs folder, and then Lab 4. And I'm going to right-click on parse raw data.py. And that's the one that's linked to on that page. Okay. And you can see, because Genie holds in memory the last set of files that was open in Genie. It has all the other files there as well. Okay, but if those are not open, okay, so let's say that these were closed, then it would be a good idea to go ahead and click open and open those things up. Okay, so here's init.sql. Okay, so this we already used to create the tables, but we don't have any data inside of the tables at this point. Okay. Right here, the book author table, which is the bridge table, that's the one you're going to use to design the view. Okay, so that's an important one to take a look at. let's look at those other files. Here's author.py and book.py. Okay, and we did some actual object-oriented programming in Python where we define classes. And the idea behind the class is that if I'm able to construct a book object or construct an author object, then I can use the make insert function for author and the make insert function for book.py to come up with the insert query statement, right? So basically, I'm going to make it so that this program, when I want to actually write the insert statement to the screen, then all I have to do is construct a book or construct an author, that we're going to do it later, and then just call the make insert function for that object, and then it'll basically have the insert statement set up there for me. Okay? So it hides some of the details from this main program. The only thing is that we need to make sure that we use our import statement so we have access to both the book class and the author class. Okay? So we're going to get going on this in just a little bit. Okay, so okay, so what I want to do first, I already started up, of course, my VMware virtual machine and the Docker machine. So I'm going to start up a ConEMU terminal. Okay, and then make sure I load the Docker machine environment variables. Okay, and pipe it into this shell. And then I'm going to do the same thing in a second shell. And then in both shells, I'm going to change into the main Docker directory. And then what I can do is get into the Postgres SQL container. Okay, so Docker. Oh, first I need to start everything up. Okay, so Docker compose up -d. Remember that -d there starts it as a daemon, so it runs in the background from this terminal. Okay, so it's started up. Okay, everything's started up now. And okay, so I'm going to create a bash. Okay, so a shell inside of Postgres SQL. And I'm going to do that in both locations, on both shells. And then in both of the shells, I want to make sure I'm working inside the lab4 directory. So I go cd/home/lab4. And I'm going to do that in both places. Okay, and then one of them I'd like to open up PSQL inside of the lab4 database. Okay, so I'm going to do that here in the first one. Okay, so PSQL -U space Bob space dash capital W to prompt for the password, and then the database name, which is lab4_DB. Okay, and this type some pass, and then you should get into that. Okay, if I type \D, you can see that I ran init.sql because I have all three tables created. Okay, and also the sequences that are used to give the IDs, ID fields of value in case you don't put those values in when you do your insert statements. Okay, but we are going to put those in there. And let's again take a look at where we left off last time. Okay, so I'm going to run parse raw data.py. And this is what it looks like right now. So it's putting up a list of the first name and last name, the way that I was breaking things apart. Okay, so if you look back at the code, let's look back at that a little bit. Okay, what it is I split, okay, author, which is from the authors list that was already created, okay, and the authors list gets created up above there. Okay, basically we have a while loop. Okay, we check to see if, no, actually all we needed to do was just pick off the author and then add it in. We increase the line number so that we advance to the next line, and then that's how we go about reading that. And remember, it keeps reading in until it doesn't find a comma anymore. If there's no comma at the end of the name, then it says, okay, the authors are all done. Okay, so yeah, we should open up rawdata.txt to remind you of that. When I have the authors, if there's other authors that are going to be for that same book, there's a comma. Okay, so I'll scroll down. You can see there's a comma, no comma, because that's the last author, right? And the email addresses work basically the same way. Okay, so we have our authors list, this thing right here. And if I process that list with a for loop, okay, so for each author and authors, I split it on the space, and I just print those things out, then what I get are lists that look like this. So I can separate out the first name from the last name, okay, and in the case of David Heinmeier Hansen, then I can separate first name from the middle name and then the last name, okay. And what we said, even though this is an oversimplification, you gotta at some point do something that handles the data that you have. We're gonna say that if there's two names only, then that's first name and last name. But if there's three names, okay, so the length of this list, okay, is 3, then it's going to be first name, middle name, and then last name. Okay, so here's kind of what we got to do. Let's lay this out before we're actually try to write any code. We have a constructor for the author object, capital A author, and for that we need to pass it the ID, first name, last name, and then the middle name. Okay, so it's not in order here, right? First name, last name, middle name. Well, that's the order that's expected when we use a constructor, and then the email address. Okay, so that's the order. So we need to come up with all of these things. So one thing is that we're going to need to assign an ID to each author. Okay, as we do that, we want to make sure that when we read in an author, if that author has already been inserted, we don't insert that author again. Okay, also, we will update the ID for the authors, right? Increase it by 1 every time we add in a new author, okay, to the authors table. Okay, so that's a little bit tricky. there's two things going on there, and you could do it actually with one thing, but I prefer to do it with two different things because it's actually two different things we're trying to do with respect to the authors. Okay, so if I came back to here, okay, if I look for a given set, right, going from here all the way to here, this is the book ID, right? So all of this stuff is associated with one book. When I'm processing that one book, I'm going to have a list that consists of Andrew Hunt as the first element, and then Dave Thomas as the second element, and that's going to be my authors list. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to insert Andrew for the first name and Hunt for the last name. Okay, and then I also want to go back and insert Dave for the first name, Thomas for the last name, and when I insert those values, I want to give them an ID value. So since this is the first author that I hit, then I'm going to give Andrew Hunt an ID of 1, then Dave Thomas is going to have an ID of 2. Okay, when we come down to here for the second book, since Andrew Hunt is already inserted, okay, we're going to insert before we reach that line. We don't want to insert Andrew Hunt again. So one of the things we have to do is keep track of the names, okay, to see if they're actually already in some sort of list. Okay, so I keep putting things into the list if it's unique. If the name already exists, I don't want to add that name in, and I don't want to increment the ID number for the authors, right? Because when I come here, since I'm not going to put Andrew Hunt in again, then I don't want to increment the ID number when I encounter this. When I come through again and I reach these lines, these people also already in the author's table, so I'm not going to further increment the author ID. Okay. And when I reach here, Dave Thomas is already in there, so I'm not going to increment the author ID. But Sam Ruby is going to be new, so then I will increment the author ID after that. I mean, the ID from the author's table, so the author ID. And then for David Heinemeier Hansen also, I would increment it after that, although we run out of data in this small file in this case. Okay, so it should be that Andrew Hunt gets assigned an ID of 1. Okay. Dave Thomas an ID of 2, Sam Ruby an ID of 3, and David Heinemeier Hansen will get assigned an ID of 4. So that's one thing we want to keep track of, but we need to also do one more thing, and that is, okay, it looks like we can handle the books part correctly. Okay, we get the insert statements for that portion correctly. Authors, we're still working on that, but when we do the authors, eventually we got to insert into the book author table so that we get the correct author associated with the correct book. Okay? So in order to do that, we have to insert book ID, which is no problem. Our loop already has a book ID value, so that's not a problem. Okay, so each time that while loop repeats, okay, we got a book ID, so that's taken care of for us. But the author ID is a little bit tricky. Okay, so if you look at the raw data, okay, if I just use the author ID and just say that I'm only going to increment the author ID if that's a new author, not already in some list of authors, okay, it looks like it works fine here, but then when you reach here, okay, you're not going to reinsert Andrew Hunt, but Andrew Hunt's ID has to be inserted along with the book ID for pragmatic thinking and learning along with ID 2 because Andrew Hunt is the author of this book here. Okay, so it's not only a matter of saying I don't want to insert any authors more than one time. Okay, they should only be inserted once each, but I also have to get correctly the author ID, especially when, okay, I come up with authors who already exist. I'm not adding them in again because they're already added into the authors table. So when you think about that, this is something where we've done something similar to this before, and that is we need to have some sort of way of looking up the ID for the author. So that means that we should create a dictionary that will keep track of, for each author, okay, it'll keep track of whatever the ID is that we're assigning to that author. Okay, so we need two things basically to process the authors. We need something that has the authors list, and then we need an author's dictionary that keeps track of the correct ID for each author. Okay, so that's why I said it's two things, not just one. Okay, so a little bit complex, but we've seen stuff like this in both Lab 2 and Lab 3, so it's not completely new, okay, although the application is a little bit different. All right, so that authors list is different from this authors right here, which is a list. That's a list that gets created when you're processing each book. And so this is what's going to change every time we go through the while loop. Every time the while loop repeats, this is going to change. So we need an additional list that basically will hold all the authors, right? Because we don't want something that updates each time the while loop updates. So what that means is that before the while loop starts, I need to create a list that will keep track of the authors. Okay, got to put it up here. The list we call authors right now, that changes each time through the while loop. Okay, so we can't use that one. All right, so I'm going to name this one authors list. Okay, and that's the one. That's one list. It'll last throughout the entire time the while loop is running, right? So it doesn't get rewritten each time the while loop repeats. And since I already have one named authors, I'm just going to call this authors list. But we also need to store the author's ID number so that later on when we insert into the sales, we have the correct ID number. And anytime we got to say, what is the ID for a given piece of data, a dictionary is a good way to go because it creates a good way to look things up. Okay, so we're going to do that as well. And remember the symbol for an empty dictionary, okay, is the curly braces, right? The square brackets is for a list. The curly braces is for a dictionary. Okay, and what we're going to do is try to do these things in a way so that we do just some of it at a time. We don't want to make all of it work at once because one, that's complex. Two, that's basically asking for errors to be made. Okay, so we certainly can split apart the names on a space so that we can get first name and last name. We can certainly do something like that. We can make use of that list. What we want to do is make sure that when we put in the author, okay, that we don't put in that author more than once. Okay, so let's try to take a look at this a little bit. So what we can do, let's take a step backwards just to make sure of what we're looking at. And I'm going to temporarily comment out this print statement, okay, where we're printing what it looks like after I take author and I split it using a space. Okay, so that's what I want to do, put it in there. Now, so we'll take a look at this because we want to see exactly what it is we're dealing with. So I make that couple of changes, just these few changes here, and then I want to run my program. Okay, so if you look at it, okay, I got Andrew Hunt and then Dave Thomas. And so it prints it out without splitting it on the spaces. Okay, but notice that we have a comma here, okay, comma here, commas there. Okay, so if I look at the name, I really don't want that comma inside of there. So let's deal with that. Let's change this a little bit. Okay, so what I'm going to do is remove the comma. Now, you might think, oh, should I just get rid of the last character? Well, I can't do that because if there's no comma there, then I'm going to remove part of the person's name. So what we'll do is use replace. And we'll replace a comma with an empty string. So if there's no comma there, it does nothing. If there's a comma there, it's going to get rid of it. Okay, so again, just a step at a time, not trying to do everything here. Now run it again. And then, so now I've removed the commas from the names. Okay, so what I want to do is check to see if the name is already in the overall authors underscore list, that list. If they're not in there, then I want to append them to that list. Okay, so that's all I'm trying to do, not trying to solve the whole problem. Try to solve too much at once, that's when we're going to run into trouble. So now that I'm getting the author without a comma, I'm going to say if author, which has been cleaned up, okay, is not in authors underscore list, that list, the main list that doesn't get wiped out each time it through the while loop, but it's the list that lasts throughout the whole program, okay, then what I want to do is underscore list dot append author. Okay. And then what I want to do is after the while loop is done, I want to print out authors underscore list to see what's actually in that list. Okay. So here's the end of my program right now. So I backspace until I'm outside of the while loop, and then I'm going to print authors underscore list. Okay, the one that's maintained for the whole program, because we put it here before the while loop starts. Okay, this one here, remember this, authors, each time through the while loop, it gets set to an empty list again, right? Authors underscore list is the one we need to maintain all the authors. This is just the authors for a given book, right? Authors underscore list is all the authors we have to deal with. Okay, so let's go and take a look at this. I'll run it again. And then I look at my list of authors that's printed at the very end. I got Andrew Hunt, Dave Thomas, Sam Ruby, David Heinemeier Hansen. Okay, so it's putting them in there, and it doesn't put anybody's name twice, right? It's all one time each. It adds all of them in. So that looks pretty good. Okay, so if I have some sort of insert into the authors table that corresponds to these four names, then I should be okay. Except when I do that, I have to put in ID. Okay, so we got to come up with a scheme for an ID. Then we need to put their first name, their last name, their middle name, and then their email. Okay, so basically we need to do something like that. Okay, now, here's where it's going to get a little bit tricky. Okay, well, it's already tricky, but it's going to get even a little bit trickier. But it's not going to be so much trickier that it's impossible to see what's going on. Someplace in this loop, right, I want to add in an author. Okay, but when I add in the author, I got to put in ID. Okay, so somehow we got to generate that. Okay, I'm going to have an author ID. If I set a variable for that, that variable has to be declared or given a value initialized before the while loop starts, right? Because that has to be a value that's maintained for the whole program, not changed each time the while loop repeats. Okay, so, but we can do that. That's not a big deal. Just like other IDs we've used. First name, last name, middle name. To do that, I got to split the name on a space. And then when I count the number of tokens that shows up, I know if there's a middle name or not. Right? Okay, so then that's the idea. And then I got to get the email. And you go, oh, okay, that's a little bit tricky. Why is it tricky? Well, each time I'm reading it through the raw data, okay, let's look at raw data again. Here's the book title, here's the ID. Those are good because there's only one piece of data on each line. Then we could have more than one author. Sometimes we only have one author. But if there's two authors, there's two email addresses. And if there's one author, there's one email address and so forth, right? And so when we look at the program, okay, basically when we were getting the authors for each book, yeah, each time the while loop repeats, that's for a different book, we could also get the emails. So we get a list called emails, okay, emails without any underscore or anything, that corresponds to the list of authors for the book. Okay? Not authors, all the authors all together, but authors for the book. Anytime you're going to process two lists at the same time, you don't want to use a for each style for loop. Okay? You want to use an index-based for loop. Okay? So in CENT110, what you would have seen if you took it from me, we would always be saying, how do we process a list? The answer is with a for loop. And then the next question would be, should we use a for each style for loop or an index-based for loop? And the answer should be, you should use a for each style for loop if you're going to do the same thing to every element in the list, and use an index-based one if you're not going to do the same thing to each element in the list, or if you're processing multiple lists at once. And that's what we need to do. We need to process authors and emails in the same for loop. So this for loop that I started off here, I need to change that to an index-based for loop so I can access not just this list, authors, but also the emails list, right? So both of them in the same loop, you need to use the index-based for loop. Okay, so let's change that. Okay, so for I in range 0 up to length of authors, okay, then here I have to put author index I, yeah, oh, not author, authors, that's the name of the list. And let's see, do I need to change anything else? No, I think that's it. Okay, so I changed line 40 and line 41, right? I've changed it to an index-based for loop. And then here, instead of author, for author and authors, now I have to put the name of the list and the index I. And now I changed it from a for each style for loop into an index-based for loop. And I only changed 2 lines, but once again, I want to run it, right? Because I don't want to make lots of changes at once. I want to verify the changes that I'm making actually work. Okay? And if you look at it, I get the same result. So I've successfully converted it into an index-based for loop. Okay, so, yeah.
Change the spacing, the tab in the spacing.
Oh, yeah, go to document and first check the indent type. Yeah, change the spaces. Then go document, replace tab with spaces, and save it again. Okay, so if while you're doing this you get indentation problems, which can always happen, again, go to document and then indent type, make sure you change that to spaces, okay, not tabs. And then just to make sure you replace all tabs with spaces, and then if you had any tabs, it would change to spaces. This would turn red because you made changes, so save it. Okay, and then that should remove any kind of indentation problems. All right, so we made those changes. This now is in a position to handle two lists inside of one for loop, and that's what we want to do. Okay, and we know those two lists are the same size because authors, not authors underscore list, but authors, that's the number of authors for each book, and for each author you should have an email address, right? So those two lists should be the same size. Okay, so what we want to do is see if we can, in fact, construct a capital A author, right? And then, so we could use an insert statement by calling the make insert function from the author class. Okay, so for that we need ID, we need first name, last name, middle name, and email. Okay, so let's start to get those things together. What I want to do is assign an author ID, right? So let's go up to here and we're going to set author ID and we'll start off with 1. So the first author is going to have an ID of 1. Okay, then what we want to do is if the author, okay, is not in the authors underscore list, then after we do something with the author, then we want to increment the author ID. Okay, we're going to make this one bigger. Okay, so we got to be a little bit careful here. Okay, so let's try to construct an author if that's the case. Now, this part here, we need to think about what we're going to do with this. Actually, we can indent this so that we only split it apart if it's a new author. Because if it's not a new author, then I don't need to split it apart. So I wasn't doing anything with this, but I could indent that so that only gets executed if it's a new author. Okay? Let's think of what other kind of things that should occur if it's a new author. Well, one of the things that should occur is the author ID. Remember, plus equals is saying author ID equals author ID plus. I should bump that value up. Okay? And so let's do this again in several steps. Okay, and here, let's do this at the same time. I'm going to put an else. If the author is not in authors underscore list, that list, then we're going to append the author in there. And we saw that that's keeping track of all the authors. Okay, then if that's the case, new, we're going to increment author ID. But what if the author is already in the authors underscore list? Then we got to do something else. And what that something else is, we still need to insert into the book author table. But since I don't know exactly what form this is going to take on at this point, I just put a placeholder. Okay? So in Python, if you put pass, then a line which follows a line that ends in a colon, which has to be indented, is not going to signal a syntax error. But it doesn't do anything. So pass is like no operation. Okay, but it's a good placeholder because it reminds us that we have to handle this other case, right? They might already they might be not in that list, then you add them in. But what if they already are in the list? We still have to do something in that case. So pass is just telling us we put a placeholder because we have to handle that case. Otherwise, it's not going to work correctly for all the data. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Now, what I would like to do, okay, is let's attempt to construct a capital A author object from the author class. Okay, so remember for that we need ID, first name, last name, middle name, and email. All right, we need all of those pieces there in order to do that. Okay, so let's think of what we need to do. We split it on the spaces, and what I need to do is I need to have two cases, right? One case is if there's tokens is a length of 2, so first name and last name only. And the other case is if the length of tokens is 3, then I have first name, middle name, and last name. Okay, so let's handle those two cases. Okay, so the first case, if length of tokens equals 3, okay, then first name is going to be tokens index 0, middle name is going to be tokens index 1, and last name is going to be tokens index 2. Okay? Else, or let's put it this way, let's go elif so it's more explicit. Length of tokens equals 2, first name equals tokens index 0, and middle name equals an empty string, and last name equals tokens index 1. Okay, so let me scroll that up and let's talk about that. Okay. When I split it on a space, I already got rid of the comma above here, right? I got rid of the comma here. If it has 3, right, that means there's a middle name. If it has 2, there's only first name and last name. So my two cases is there is a middle name, and that's going to be the second token. Yeah, David, Heinmeier, Hansen. Heinmeier is the second one. Okay, or it's 2, in which case there is no middle name. So I set middle name equal to an empty string. I don't set it equal to none. I set it equal to an empty string, right? So when I put it in, it'll just get treated as an empty string. Okay, so let's think now. We got author ID that's set up at the top. Okay. We got first name, middle name, and last name. So all I need is the email address, right? So let's get the email address. The email address is the same regardless of the number of tokens. So let's just get it this way. It's going to be from the emails list, index I. Okay? How do I know it's that? Because in my for loop, I'm going over the entire length of authors, which is the list of authors for just the one book. Okay? So the same index value in the emails list corresponds to the email address of the author inside of this list. Okay? That's why I'm using an index-based for loop, because then it makes it very easy to go inside of this in order to get the correct email. All right. So what we'll do, I'm going to run it even though it doesn't produce any extra output. Why? Because I'm trying to check for any kind of syntax errors, right? Because I typed in quite a bit of stuff there. So I'm going to just run it for syntax errors. No syntax errors, right? Still printing out output like this. So let's go and now add some more output. Okay, so let's leave this. We'll leave that up there for a little while. And what I want to do is I want to create an capital A author, so the class author, I want to create one of those objects. Okay, so let's do that. Okay, so right here, okay, so I'll just go AUTH is equal to author. Okay, I need an ID number. That's going to be author ID. Okay, notice that I have this line before I increment the author ID because that will be for the next author, right? So I put it there, author ID. Then it's going to be first name, then last name, then middle name, then email, I construct the author, okay, and then what should I do? Well, let me look at the author class. I got a toString method, so I just print out the author, then it'll at least print out all of this information right here. So why don't I do that? Okay, that's simple enough. Okay, so I use AUTH because I have so many, I got author and stuff, so I don't want to use that variable again. So I just use AUTH because I knew I didn't use that any other place. Okay, and I'm just going to print it out. Now, I'm printing out all kinds of stuff at this point, so you got to be a little bit careful when you look at the output. So let's do something. I'm going to temporarily comment out this print statement here, and even this, I'm going to comment that out. So the last one that says print authors underscore list, that's just going to print out the list of all the authors. I'll just leave that one. But this time it should print out each object of the author class, right? That's what it's going to do right there using the double underscore, str double underscore. Okay, so let me run it. Okay, so it says, what does it say? Okay, I got some funny looking stuff there. Okay. So I got Andrew Hunt. Oh, no, this is okay. This funny looking stuff, that's because Andrew Hunt has no middle name, right? And then my double underscore, str double underscore puts commas between each thing. So that's actually okay. This one is okay, this one is okay, this one is okay. And look at David Heinemeier Hansen, it separates it out. Okay? But what it also has that's not okay is the following. You see Andy Hunt has Andy Hunt at programmers.com, comma. And then for Sam Ruby, it has Sam Ruby at pragprogrammers.com. It has a comma. Well, a comma is not part of the email address, but it's putting it there as though it's part of the email address, because what happens is that if there's more than one author, there's more than one email address, and then it's going to have a comma on all the lines except the last one. Okay, but that's easy to fix. So let's go and fix that. Oops, wrong thing. Let's go and fix that. That comes from right here, okay, where basically we take this line, okay, and then we figure out, right, if there's a comma in it, if it's 0, we end this loop. So what we have to do is when we append this in, which is supposed to be the email, I'm going to do the following. Okay? So what I do is replace the comma with an empty string. But I do it here, not here. Because if I do it here, then this if statement is not going to work, right? Because I just took out the comma that I need to have. So I put it here So when I append it to emails, then the comma is going to be gone. All right. So what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to run it. If it works, then I'm going to upload this into the daily work folder for today. So in case you weren't able to make all these changes, you can get the copy, because that's actually a lot of stuff to get working correctly. But let's test it first. Okay. Now it looks okay. All right. So no extra comma on the end. All right. So first things first. Let us go to, this is today's daily work. I'm going to upload a file, and it's going to be my parse raw data.py, because we made a lot of detailed changes for that. Okay, then we're going to stop for a while. So in case you got to get that file and update your file, then go ahead and do it. So we'll take a break right here. And then when we come back, then we'll basically figure out how we're going to do the sales part. Okay? Okay, so just take a break, and then get a copy of that file if you need to.
How much of that Python stuff will we have to know on the exam?
None. Yeah. If there's any questions about Python on exams, it would be an essay question, not code. But SQL you need to know.
getting listed for author?
Put from author, import author. Yeah.
I'm getting 3 commas for some reason. Like, it's supposed to be only 2 right? Because of the count.
What are you getting? It looks okay.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, you got an extra comma.
Yeah.
Oh, look at your author class then. Oh, author.
Oh, sorry. Maybe this is my comma acting.
Yeah. Yeah, you got a comma here and you put a comma here.
Oh.
My file to yours, but I don't see a difference. But when I do the output, this name, the first name is in, or the last name's in the middle name section.
Okay, let's look at your author class then. You made yours first name, middle name, and last name.
Oh, I see.
And I had a different order.
Oh, okay.
So when you put yours in, you got to put it in this order and it should work okay.
Okay.
Try that. Well, the easy way would be to switch it to match mine, which is I put first name, last name, then middle name.
Okay.
Then you don't have to change anything else.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm not sure why I did it that order, but then because I did, I had to stay consistent with it. So yours actually makes more sense, but the easiest thing is just change it to my order. Okay, so let's continue. Now, so what I'd like to do is be able to write the insert statement for inserting an author. So that's what I want to do. And the change for that is actually pretty easy. I just, instead of printing auth, okay, I go auth.makeInsert. So I call that function instead of just printing out just the auth object. And if I run it, it looks like this. So let's take a look at this. Insert into author's ID, first name, middle name, last name, email. Okay, so values 1, Andrew, empty space for the middle name, Hunt, and then it gets that in. Okay, so that looks like it's working. So in terms of inserting just the authors into the authors table, looks like we have what we need. And if I put back the stuff for the books, then we could get the books and the authors in there. But we also want to insert into the book underscore author table, right, to get the correct authors associated with the book that they're supposed to be the authors for. So that part, that's where that dictionary is going to come into play. We didn't do anything with the dictionary yet, but we're going to do that. So we have two things we have to take care of. One is we got to start making use of that dictionary so that we can get the correct ID for each author. So that Andrew Hunt is ID 1, Dave Thomas is ID 2, Sam Ruby is ID 3, and David Henmeyer Hansen is ID 4. We need to get our dictionary so it's keeping track of that. The other thing is we got to insert into the book author table. To do that, to be consistent with the way I handled author and the way I handle book, let's write a Python class called book underscore author. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save this inside of my Lab 4 folder, and I'm going to call it book underscore author dot py. Right, and I'm going to pattern this after the same thing that I did for both the book class and the author class. You start off with class. Okay, then I create my constructor. Okay, then I need to start thinking what goes in here. Well, it's going to have an ID field. I look back at init.sql, and I got ID, then I need book ID and author ID. Okay, so I'll put BID for book ID, AID for author ID. And then let's define the instance variables, right? So self.id is the past ID. Self.book underscore ID is going to be the past value, BID. Self.author underscore ID is going to be AID. Okay, so those are my instance variables. And let's create the equivalent of the toString, right? The str function. So we can just check things. It's a good way so that we can see what's going on if it's working correctly. Okay, so I'll say temp is equal to, I'm going to convert self.id into a string and just make a comma separated value string. Okay, so all I did is I created a double underscore, str double underscore. I need to convert all these numbers into strings so I can concatenate it with the commas. Then I use that same kind of if statement that will only be run if I'm running book author directly. I construct a book author object. So it's going to have an ID of 1, a book ID of 3, and an author ID of 7, and I'm just going to print it out. So it should print out a comma separated value string that basically has 1, 3, 7. That's basically what it should look like. Okay, so let's go to the shell and run it. And then that's what it does. Of course, what we need to do is come up with the insert statement. So here I need to look back at this. Right, so I need ID. Actually, since I don't care about this value, I could use the default value there. So what I want to do is insert into book author, and I want to put in book ID and author ID. That's what I want to have happen. Okay, so let's start writing that. Okay, so since these are numbers, make sure that you put them inside the str function. Okay, and let's take a look at that. Insert into book underscore author the following fields, book ID and author ID. That has to match the table. So let me look back at init.sql. Yep, that's the way I named it in that table. Space values, then the starting parentheses. I need to convert this to a string so I can concatenate it with these other strings, this comma here and then the string right here. Gotta convert this into a string. Then after that's done, the ending parentheses, a semicolon, and then that looks like it should do it. So I'm going to say print ba.make insert, and then I can test this out to see if this works the way it should, and I want to do that. I have an extra parentheses at the end of the line that I'm not supposed to have, right? This parentheses matches with this, and this is just a string here. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, let me run this again. Insert into book author these field values with the values this and this. Okay, that looks okay based upon the data that I put in there. All right, so I got that working. So I'm going to upload my book author class, bookauthor.py, in case you need to take a look at that one. All right, now I want to go back to this, and the first thing I want to do before I forget is I want to say from book underscore author, the book underscore author module, import book underscore author, the class. Okay? So I put that in, that's the first step. All right, now this dictionary that we had defined here, that dictionary, excuse me, didn't use it so far. That's the thing to create our lookup, so we can look up the ID value for the author, okay, and associate that with the author's name. Okay, so that's what we want to do here. Okay, so let's start taking a look at where we're dealing with the authors again. Okay, so remember, this is the authors for just one book, right? Authors underscore list, right, is what we have for each book. Okay, so if the author is not in the authors list, we append it to authors underscore list, but we should also update the dictionary at that point. Okay, so right here, let's do that. Okay, so authors underscore DICT for dictionary. All right, so what we have to do here is we have to put the name of the key. We might as well use author, okay, for the name of the key. So author would be like Andrew Hunt, or Dave Thomas, or Sam Ruby, or David Heinemeier Hansen, right? With the spaces in there, right? The full, just one string with spaces in it. So we're going to say for the dictionary, we're going to use that as a key. So either Andy Hunt, or Andrew Hunt, or Dave Thomas, or so forth, right? That's what we're going to do. And before we actually make use of that, let's see if that dictionary comes out to what it's supposed to be, right? So how can we check that? same place where we're printing out the whole list of all the authors, let's print out the author's dictionary at the end of the while loop. Because at the end of this should store correctly the ID for each of the authors. So let's see if that actually works. Okay. Oops. What happened? Oh, I hit an up arrow and that's not even the right program. Sorry. There we go. Okay, so here's my dictionary. I can tell because it has a curly brace to start and end it. And it says that Sam Ruby has an ID of 3. David Hanmeyer Hansen has an ID of 4. Dave Thomas has an ID of 2. And Andrew Hunt has an ID of 1. Remember, in dictionaries, when you have your key value pairs, the order of the key value pairs is undefined, right? And in fact, it just put it in that order there. Who knows why it comes out in that order? Doesn't matter, right? If I want to know Dave Thomas's ID, I say the name of the dictionary and I pass it this key and it'll return this value, right? That's why dictionaries are good for looking things up, because all you do is put the name of the key and it looks up the value for that key. So this is set up correctly, okay? And don't worry about if the order is not the same order you think you stored stuff in the dictionary, right? In a list, the order is very important. That's maintained. In a dictionary, the list of the key value pairs is undefined, right? There is no such thing as an order for it. All it is it's a lookup, right? I put the key, I get the value. Okay, so that is looking closer to what I want. Okay, so I can store the correct values for the author ID in the authors underscore DICT dictionary. So now I need to create my book author objects. So how do I do that? Okay, so here's the case when the author is not already in the authors list, so a new author, okay? And so I just printed auth.makeInsert because I created a capital A author object. I just printed out the make insert part to handle that part. So let's create a book author object. Okay, so here I'm just going to go BA for book author. Book author, I have to pass it the book ID and then the author ID. Okay, so where is book ID coming from? It's actually way up here. Each time I go through the while loop, I'm processing a different book. And I just get it off the first line for that book and I convert it into an int. Okay, so I got my book ID. Okay, what about the author ID? That's a thing that I'm updating, okay, as I'm going throughout this while loop, and as it repeats, that value keeps going up each time I have a new author. Okay, so let's try this out. Okay, not complete, right? You can tell, hopefully, that it's not complete. But let's see what this gives us. Okay, and let's hope there's no syntax errors, but if there are, we'll fix them. Oops. Oh, yeah, my mistake. Okay, when I define book author, right, ID, I'm sorry, but I didn't put this in here. So I made a mistake in the constructor. Since my insert statement doesn't even use the ID, I don't need it. So let's get rid of it. to make sure I didn't mess everything up, I got to run that program again, bookauthor.py. Okay, so that looks okay. So what I should do, since I messed this one up here, I'm going to upload new version. And replace that, because I had uploaded that and that was wrong. So that's not correct. Okay, so what I can do, hopefully, is run this main program, and then this is what I get. Okay, so insert into authors, it puts Andrew Hunt in. It inserts into book underscore author 1, 1. So for book ID 1, which is the first book, it puts in Andrew Hunt. Then insert into authors Dave Thomas's stuff, so that's ID 2. Okay. Insert into book ID, author ID values 1, 2. The first book is okay. So it did Andrew Hunt and it did Dave Thomas, right? So let's look at the next one. It says insert into authors, okay, this value, put Sam Ruby in, okay. Then when you look at it, insert into book author 4, 3. So book ID 4, author ID 3, which is Sam Ruby, which is correct. But what happened to the second book and the third book? It's not in there, right? Okay, so the reason why that happened, right? So we got all our authors show up at least once. In fact, they only show up once, right? So if you look at insert into book author, here's the one for Andrew Hunt, here's the one for Dave Thomas, here's the one for Sam Ruby, and here's the one for David Heinemeier Hansen. But it did it only once because our program does this inside here. And where is that? That's inside of this if statement. If the author is not in authors underscore list, that list. So that means it's a new author that wasn't already in there, right? So what if the author is already in there? We still got to insert the book into book author. So that's where this thing we had before, which is pass, that's where it's going to come into play. Okay, so we say book author BA equals book underscore author, okay, book ID, author ID, print BA dot make insert. Okay, so we put it there. And the difference is we don't increment author ID, we don't do all this stuff. We just look up the book ID, we just get the author ID, except, oh, is this correct right here? Okay, it's not correct, right? It's just basically, that's a counter that we increment every time we add a new author in. So this is not correct, right? And in fact, this got correct maybe only by luck, okay? The reason why is we need to actually look up the author ID from what? The dictionary, that's right, okay. So it looked like it was working, but actually this is not correct. That was only by luck that that came out correctly. So what do we have to do here instead? We have to use the dictionary. Okay. And the key thing is what's going to go inside of these square brackets. Let me hit a return to move this to the next line. Okay. What should we put down for the key so we can get the ID value, right? Remember, dictionary is key value pairs. What goes in here for the key? I heard somebody say it. It's author, right? When I store, right? When I use into the dictionary, what I put in there is the author. So I should put author here. Okay, so here, that should be author also. Okay, so then now it's going to properly look stuff up, and it won't be the numbers come out just by luck, but especially in this second part, it should come out the correct numbers themselves. Okay, so if we had ran it with just author ID, you would see that it doesn't have the right value. So for, here, let's do it. In fact, let me show you what that would have looked like. Okay, don't change yours back. I'm changing mine back just to show you what that looks like, to show you what kind of error would result. Okay, so here, insert into book author, ID book 2, which is written by Andrew Hunt, and it puts Sam Ruby's ID number there. Not correct, because we didn't look up what Andrew Hunt's actually correct ID number is. Okay, so that's how I could tell what was going on. So let's go back and fix this to what it should be. The author's dictionary, look up the value based upon the author as being the key. And the author is Andrew Hunt, or Dave Thomas, or Sam Ruby, or David Heinemeier Hansen, right? That string. And so now I run it, then you can see it's correct now. Okay, so Andrew Hunt, book 1, Andrew Hunt. Book 1, Dave Thomas. Book 2, Andrew Hunt. Book 3, Andrew Hunt. Book 3, Dave Thomas. Okay, book 4, Dave Thomas, Sam Ruby, David Heinemeier Hansen. Now it's correct because we're using that dictionary to look up the values correctly. So, two things. First, these two print statements were there for debugging purposes, so let's take those out. So that's the first thing. Okay, run it again. Okay, won't change too much. Just took off those last two things at the end. Okay, but this is missing which insert statements. Insert into which table? Books, that's right, I heard somebody say it, right? So we're inserting to authors, we're inserting into book author, we're not inserting into the books table. That's because I commented that out. Now, where is that? Here. Okay, now, you got to think about this a little bit, okay, and watch what happens. Okay, so I just uncommented it, but hopefully you'll be able to pick up what's wrong with this. Okay. So what is wrong with this? What if we redirected this into add initial data.sql? What would be wrong? Yeah, go ahead, Dennis. It's not organized, okay, but in some sense the order is going to be determined by the order of the information in the file. But when you say not organized, what is actually the biggest problem about this? So it's correct. The order is not correct. Some of the order is by the order of the data, but there's stuff that is not correct based upon what we have to do. Anybody see it? Okay, look at this line right here. Okay, insert into books, ID, title, ISBN, this stuff right here. So when does the pragmatic programmer get a book ID of 1? Right here. Is that a problem? Sure is, right? Because look at these two lines right here. It assumes that that book ID already exists. So that's where the order is definitely not correct. Okay, so what can we do? Okay, so let's look at this. Here, I'm going to just hit the up arrow and trace my way upwards because the program is long and I didn't have a printout of it. Okay, so it's at the same level as that for loop. So, but that for loop is what prints out the insert into authors and the insert into book underscore author, right? But I don't actually have to have these two things here. I just added that. Those were there before I added that for loop. So if I take those two lines, okay, I'm just going to copy it. And I paste it here. I should be able to do that. Okay, so let's see. Do I have book ID, book title, and ISBN at that point? Well, I know I got book ID up above there. And I had a print statement with the book title there. Well, let's double check. Oh, there's my book title, right? Because remember, book ID, book title, that's just the first two lines. So I got those. So I got this, I got this, I got ISBN. Okay, just got that right there. Right? And then so I should be able to make the book and then print it out. All right. Can't move it up too far, right? I need to have those values. Run it. And now do we have, let's see, insert into books. So we got book ID 1. Insert into authors, that's okay, because authors doesn't depend directly on books. Insert into book author. Does these two IDs exist? Book ID 1, author ID 1. Yes, it does. Okay. Then we go to this line, insert a new author, Dave Thomas, ID of 2. Okay. And then do we have book ID 1, author ID 2? Yes, we do. Okay. Then it goes to insert into books again. It inserts a second book. There's no new authors for that book, so what it's going to do is just insert into book author, book ID 2, author ID 1. Okay, and it's going to go to the next book. Okay, so it inserts into books, pragmatic unit testing. Those two authors already exist, so it just inserts into book author. And then now we got this, and then so basically now the order is okay. Now, you might think it would be nice to separate all this stuff. So you got insert into books all in a row, then insert into authors all in a row, then insert into book author all in a row. Okay, and that would be somewhat doable, but you would have to do manual manipulation in order to do that. So this sequence of insert statements, this is about as good as you can get if you're just directly processing the file. However, what do we have to do to test? First, we got to write it to add initial data.sql. Okay, right to that. And then what else do we have to do? Yeah, we got to bring it into the database, right? We got to include it. Okay, so let's do that. /I, and we get all these insert statements. no complaints, so it looks like it's okay, right? So what you have to do is create your addView.sql. To do that, you just go back to your init.sql and you use this, right, to help you to create that. You include that, then when you run the query, you should get something that has the same information as that original view. It's not going to look exactly like the original view, but it should have the same information. Okay, so what you want to do is get that working, and then bring in the data, and then add your view, and then that way you can basically complete that lab. Okay, so that's it for what I want to cover today. So if you ran into something, raise your hand and I'll come around and help you with it, and then that's basically it.